what I'm going to cover today, as many of you know, and actually I call it dominating the domino effect, which I'll explain in a minute what that means. But I'm really going to be talking about how I've been able to get access to some of the bigger name influencers and how you can do the same, and also why it matters, and also how it's benefited me personally and professionally. So that's really the idea I had behind today. It was on a whim that I decided to do this. Just enough people had asked me the question of how, that I decided, you know what, I think I'm going to do that as a free webinar. And so I ultimately decided to pull this together. I will say near the end, I'm going to tell you about something we have coming up that's free if you guys haven't heard about it. And at the same time, I'm going to tell you about something else we're working on as well. But I'll also let you know that there isn't, just so you know, going into it, because I think sometimes we come to webinars and we think, okay, what's the pitch? I will tell you there's not one thing, even if you wanted to, that you could actually send me a credit card for today. So there's no pitch as far as that goes, but I am going to tell you about a couple of things we have coming up. So having said all that, I want to maximize your time. I want to try to keep us to an hour. I'm going to try to leave time for Q&A, which I'm thinking there will be, but I'm going to jump right in. And so I'm going to do a PowerPoint today. I don't always do that, but today I'm going to. And I'm also going to watch the screen to see if I need to let people in. So I'm just going to set up my PowerPoint here. And like I said, I'll do more of a formal presentation, but then I'll open up for questions, Q&A, that type of thing. So let's jump right in, because again, I want to make magic happen. And I shouldn't have left my phone over in the other desk, because now I can't keep track of the time, but I'm sure I'll be under time for at least the presentation side. So here's the idea behind the domino effect. And I kind of changed my thinking on this recently, but the idea is that when people ask me how I got this influencer's attention or that influencer's attention, I always say that the hardest one is the biggest domino. You know, the hardest one to knock down is the big, heavy domino. And so I always say I did all the work to get to that big, heavy domino, knock it over, and then it started taking the other dominoes out. So if you look at, people, the biggest influencer was the hardest. The second time I got an influencer was a little bit easier because I could leverage the name of the first influencer. So that's what I mean by the domino effect. However, my girlfriend and I were talking about it and realized, because, dominoes usually start with the small one. And I was saying the hardest one was the big one. So what I'm actually suggesting, here is it's actually more like riding a bike up a hill. The hardest part is getting up to the top, and then it's easier when you come down, or a roller coaster as well. So it got easier once I knocked down the first big domino. And so now I kind of liken it that I started with a small domino, and that's all the work nobody's seen in the background. I asked a comic one time, what do you think is the average person doesn't realize about stand-up comedy? And he said, how much work goes into it without making it look like any work at all went into it. And so all the small dominoes to get to the big one, most people didn't see that work, but it definitely happened. And then once they hit the big domino, the way I look at it now is then it starts hitting small ones again. So in other words, it starts with small, goes to big, and then it goes from big and starts its way back down. But that's what I mean by the domino effect, because once you get it rolling, it really does sort of take on a steam of itself, just like dominoes do. Having said that, I'm not able to watch the chat. So if you have questions, put it in there, but I'll tackle it later, or I will leave room for Q&A. And also, I meant to say off the top, definitely, if you're so inclined, tell us where you're calling in from, how you're finding us. Tell us a bit about yourself if you want in the chat as well. So the idea with this domino effect is to help you become seen, become heard, and to create some impact. So I want to start out by, first of all, saying the world needs your voice. So that's one of the reasons to bother. The world needs your message. The world needs your voice. And this is a way to amplify your voice, what I'm about to talk about today. So a little bit about how I get started. Some of you have heard this story before, so I won't belabor it. I'll just say I get started in my career as a speaker, as whatever term you want to put on it beyond that. Call it an expert if you call it that. That's up to you to choose. But I get started in this journey in stand-up comedy. I actually got tricked into performing stand-up one night. How do you get tricked into performing stand-up one night, you ask? What happened was I had a stage play in a festival, never wanted to be on a stage, never wanted to be speaking to an audience, which is kind of ironic now. But I didn't want that. But what happened was we went to a workshop for 2 weeks on stand-up comedy, and we learned how to adjust the mic stand. That was really all, in my opinion, we really learned. But the third week, we were going to watch some comics entertain us. So we went to a local nightclub, and we did all the marketing to bring the comics there. About 5 minutes to showtime, we were looking around for the comics, and there were no comics. So we found out with 5 minutes notice, we were the comics for that night with no notice. So there were 15 of us. 8 walked out the front door immediately, literally walked out the front door, not a second thought. 7 stayed. I was one of the foolish ones who stayed. And we were all debating who was going to go up first. And I'd been to Toastmasters. How many people here, show of hands, have ever been to or heard of Toastmasters? Either or. Okay, so Toastmasters, one of the things they teach you is if you're going to face a fear like speaking, go first. Don't wait and watch 50 other people go first. And so there were comics were debating who's going to go up first. I decided I'm going to go by what Toastmasters says. And I jumped up on the stage, grabbed the mic out of the stand, told what I thought was the best joke I've ever heard in my life, to dead silence. And that's worse in comedy than booing or heckles. Then I told the second joke because I figured I've already done the hard work to get up here. No more laughter this time either. Still dead silence. Bombing, as we call it in comedy. At that point, the guy that was running the show hit me in the back of the head. He schmucked me and he said, "You idiot! What are you doing out there? We haven't even turned the mic on yet." And so my first time performing comedy, I told my first 2 jokes without the mic turned on. I never used to share the second part of the story, but people would ask me what happened after that. Well, we turned the mic on, told the 2 jokes again, and they bombed again. So I think I'm the only comedian in history to bomb twice in 10 minutes with the same material. So that's what happened on that stage that night. People also ask me what made me decide to stay and go on the stage, having such a great fear of speaking and obviously being on a stage. And I said I had this vision of these 2 old dudes, and I was one of them, sitting next to on the stage at the bar, next to the stage, looking at these other comics performing one night, and me talking to the other old guy saying that was going to be me. That could have been me. I was going to do that one time and didn't. And the vision of that regret is what pushed me to do it, because I didn't want to be that guy sitting on the bar stool saying I could have. And so that's what pushed me into performing stand-up. And I ended up performing over 9 years, I ended up performing 700 shows. Interestingly enough, how I got into speaking was somebody from the comedy club, the comedy group I was a part of, invited me to go see Tony Robbins. I went to see Tony Robbins. Person next to me in the stand said, "Can you believe this guy's getting paid this much to speak today?" And I said, "Wait a minute, how much is he getting paid?" And they said like $100 and some $1,000. This wasn't his own event. This was just him being invited for like a 45-minute keynote. And I said, "Hold the firm. Wait a minute. I'm paying $10 to go to the comedy club and get $5 from the door. And this guy's getting that much money? I want to learn about this speaking business." And that's literally what triggered the idea to get into speaking. I approached a local community college, convinced them to let me teach a sales course. It took a long time to convince them to let me teach a sales course, which is kind of appropriate. It was the first sales course they ever put on at their college. And then basically, for lack of going through all the details of how I built the career from there, the rest is history. On the screen, this is a picture of me performing at one of the improvs in California. And this is me the day I performed at Second City. And those are 2 of my biggest milestones on stand-up comedy. So it had a happy ending as well. And then I kind of semi-retired from it. The other quick part of my story is I was raised by a single mother, grew up in a tiny little town in Canada called Summerside, which is in a tiny province called, for those that aren't Canadian here, called Prince Edward Island. And that's a picture of me, by the way. You should never show anybody in public. I mean, I should stop pushing this picture around because it means it's going to stay in cyberspace forever. But that was me at about 16 years old. That was the mother that raised me. And I grew up, like I say, small town, barely graduated high school, got a 49 plus 1. Teacher told me, well, didn't tell me, but I knew the teacher gave me the plus 1 that allowed me to legally graduate. My yearbook was not written anything about succeeding or likely to succeed. Graduated without knowing the difference between fiction and nonfiction. And as I just said in my TED Talk that just went live this week, I was dating a girl, or I went on a date with a girl who told me that she had broken up with a guy a while back that didn't know, because he didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction. And I said, as I said in my TED Talk, I never said a word. I didn't tell her the difference, that I didn't know either. But it's kind of ironic, having written books and stuff later, that I didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction. Little known secret, still to this day, the way I know them is fiction. I think of like pixies and fairies and hobbits. And then, so I think of that when I think of the word fiction. And then, so all I do is put non in front of it and say, okay, that one's not pixies, fairies. That's the real one. That's how I know the difference still. I didn't read my first book until age 27. Fun fact, the book I read first was Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Second fun fact, the second book I ever read was Think and Grow Rich. So I always said, if you're going to start late, that's a good way to get ahead, to start with those 2 books. But I didn't read my first book until age 27. So I say all this stuff to tell you that what I'm about to share with you, it doesn't matter where you start. It's what you do next. I also will say, when I say I didn't read my first book until age 27, around the time before I read my first book, I told my mother I wanted to write a book, and she said, "Well, son, I think you have to read one first." So that's kind of what started it too. So let me start out by asking you guys, by show of hands, how many people know it takes 21 days to create a habit? So what if I were to tell you and blow your mind and tell you that 21-day habit is a misnomer? It's a myth. It's not a true thing. If you read the book, The One Thing, they cite the resources to demonstrate to you that the guy who created the thing that they call the 21-day habit said he was misquoted. And he said 21 days is when the habit starts, but when it's cemented is 66 days. So I bring this up because I'm trying to teach people this and share people with this along the way, but also to state this. If that's not true, what else might not be true? Meaning we believe stuff sometimes, and it doesn't mean that it's rooted in fact. So what else might not be true is that it's super hard to work with influencers, or whatever term you want to put on experts, influencers, celebrities, business celebrities, what have you. It does take work, and you have to be creative, and there is strategy involved. And it isn't easy, but it also isn't hard. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The thing I wanted to open up with as well is, can you take my word for it? Meaning, do I even know how to reach and connect with these influencers? So here's the next three slides. I think it's three. I want to really clarify, if you know me, I'm Meat and Potatoes from Prince Edward Island. This is not a Me Inc. thing. So when you see these, it's not me saying, look at me or what have you. It's just really to demonstrate that what I'm sharing with you, I know, because I do believe if you don't know the person that one of the worst things we see now is people are running, say, a Facebook ad saying, let me teach you how to make 7 figures. And then you get to know them and you find out later on they've never made 7 figures in their life. So I don't want to be that guy. So what I'm saying is, when I say I can show you how to connect with influencers, I want you to know I've done it. I was running so behind, I didn't even get to update this picture with a picture of me and John Taffer. He's the guy from Bar Rescue. I didn't get to put the picture in, and also Richard Paul Evans. I put these as placeholders so I could put the pictures in later, and then I never got to the pictures in later. But John's Bar Rescue, and Richard he wrote The Christmas Box, and 41, I think it's 41 now, New York Times bestsellers. You probably know Kate Hudson here, Deepak Chopra, Jack Canfield with Chicken Soup for the Soul, Lisa Nichols, Tommy Chong. Dave's not here, man. Ami James from the Miami Ink show, James Redfield who wrote Celestine Prophecy, Matthew McConaughey. All right. I'm sure you know who that is. And then JJ Virgin. So I just put some of them on a screen. And just to demonstrate this even further, this is my week this week. And there's a couple I didn't put on here, but just this week as an example, we interviewed Dave Hester on the far left, my left, from Storage Wars. Yep. If you guys know who that is, that was his signature phrase on that show. Middle is Randy Spelling. So he was on 90210, Malibu Shores. Aaron Spelling was his father. Tori Spelling is his sister. I was just talking to Randy while I was in LA, but on via message, because we're looking to bring together an event together. So I was just talking to him about that. Jake the Snake Roberts, if you guys remember him from the wrestling world. Matthew McConaughey with him this week, like I said. Kate Hudson, we were talking to her team about a project. Brian Austin Green, also for 90210. We were supposed to schedule. Well, we're supposed to be on an interview at the W in Hollywood this week, but they actually ended up not having to, but they ended up going a day early to a Comic-Con thing they were doing, and you may have even heard it in the news because Shannon Doherty, who was in the Brenda she played, she had 4-stage cancer, and she was giving an update at that event, so it's all over the news right now, and that's where Brian was this week. But what I'm saying is, just in a week, these are some of the people that we were talking to, their team or them themselves, like Brian and Dave and Jake, that was all, and Randy are all through them themselves. So when you're doing this kind of stuff, I've had some successes, and you look at it and it looks like a big success, but I also want you to know sometimes you get a no. That's hard for some people to face, but sometimes the answer is no. Like, you can't schedule them, you can't get their attention. Now, I will say all 3 of these people on the screen, I did hear back from either them or their team, but it's been a no when I've tried to connect. So Jillian Michaels on the far left from The Biggest Loser, if you remember that show. So that was her publicist I was working with. We tried twice, and we actually we're in discussions about her working on coming onto a documentary we're working on. Hugh Jackman, same thing, but he was doing, I forget what the movie's called now, but the movie that he did. What was it called? The one that he did was more like an opera. You guys know which one I mean? I forget what it's called, but he did. He was dancing and The Showman. Anyway, he was working on that movie at the time, so he was literally on set. That's why we couldn't make it work. And in the middle, the one guy that eludes me year after year, which is Seth Godin, if you guys know who he is, the Purple Cow. Seth Godin is the Purple Cow for me now. I actually years ago made a list of 100 people I wanted to connect with. Seth was on that list. He's the only one still alive that I haven't sat with or interviewed or met. And we've talked, and here's the interesting part: out of the three of them, he's the one I have his personal email. He's the one I talk to, but it's been a hard no usually. So what I'm saying though is sometimes you're going to get a no when you make reach out and you try to connect, and that's okay. And also sometimes a no becomes a yes. So I tried many times to interview Deepak Chopra, and then finally it happened. I tried many times to interview Gary Vee, and finally it happened. So sometimes a no becomes a yes. So that's the power of staying vigilant. So that's kind of a backstory of, I mean, as why me? Because again, I want you to know that I can show you how to do this stuff. The next part, which is maybe just important, is why bother? Why bother putting in the effort? I'm going to tell you, it's not easy, especially at first, to knock down that first domino I told you guys about, the big one, to get that attention of that first influencer. So why should you even bother? Well, the why you should bother is it'll amplify in 10 times everything you do. So what do I mean by that? Well, as an example, I have them by me on purpose, but our latest two books with Blue Talks. So if you guys see here, if you guys can see on the screen, at the top, it says forward written by Dr. Joe Vitale. And in the back, you'll see Joe Vitale's photo up there. The other one that came out at the same time was Marie Diamond. Marie's photo up there. They're both from The Secret. Our previous Blue Talks books, the forwards are written by Randy Spelling, who I showed you earlier, Demo Casanova, who's a Grammy-winning producer. Upcoming now, we have James Redfield and Ken Honda. So Ken Honda from Mind Valley and James Redfield wrote Celestine. They're both writing the forward of the next book. Neil Donald Walsh from Conversations with God is upcoming. Anthony Trucks and Kelly Cardenas. And the reason I bring that up again is not the name drop. It's to say, why bother? Well, think about the power, both for us to attract other people to come into our Blue Talks brand, and also to attract more attention to our books when you have an influencer who's writing the forward for you. Whenever I put out my book, The Book of Why, we had James Redfield, again, Celestine wrote the forward. And then we had endorsements by Biff Naked for the Canadian music fans here, John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, and so on and so forth. And again, I can tell you for a fact, it helped with book sales. So the why bother is because this stuff can 10 times everything you're doing. Another example is we did an event. We did the event, like I say, at LA with Dave Hester just this week. One of the other events we did was at Stanford, and Anthony Trucks, who's an American Ninja Warrior and NFL linebacker, Anthony was our keynote speaker. It draws other people. Other people signed up because of that. How many people saw me to post the picture of Matthew McConaughey from this week? Yeah, this past week. That picture on Facebook alone right now is approaching 250 likes and 50 some comments. So think about the added credibility and visibility a person gets from that. So to me, that's the why bother. Now, well, I'll go into it in a sec. Let me ask you guys this. Does this photo add credibility? So if you're looking at this photo of a person that you were thinking of working with, does the photo add credibility? What I'm going to say, because I can't speak for you, is when I ask this question, 99% of the time, if I'm in a room or if I can see all the things on the screen and I'm not doing a PowerPoint, but I ask this question, 99% of the time, the answer is yes, it adds credibility. Oh, how about this one? So as seen on. Little known fact, you guys may or may not know this, but there's been studies that show that as seen on, you know, when it says as seen on and it shows a banner, whether it's on a website or whether it's a banner like this, they say that increases your credibility by 70%. So if you walk away from this webinar today and you just make note of that. So here's the cool thing. Even if you haven't been on any show whatsoever, I can get you on enough shows, I can tell you how to do it, to have an as seen on banner done in less than a month. A thing that increased your credibility by 70%. It can be done that quickly. And a big hint for that is that you don't have to be on the biggest shows, because most people now with, I can see people on my screen right now who have a podcast or some form of an interview show. There's almost 3 million podcasts right now. Some of them active, some not. So the average person doesn't know how big a podcast is just by seeing their logo. So now it doesn't have to be iTunes or Roku or what have you. So again, I'm going ahead a bit, but this is a way to increase credibility and visibility. that 99% of people don't use. I'll back it up by saying this, how important as seen on and banners are. There's a reason why Tony Robbins, Jay Shetty, Lisa Nichols, Jack Canfield. It's a reason why when you go to their websites, all of them make room for as seen on banners, and most of them, it's the first thing or near the top of their page. That's how much credibility it is. I think we all know Tony Robbins has done enough study into what works psychologically that he wouldn't use an as seen on banner and take up the front real estate of his page if it wasn't working. So again, if you just took that from me today, that's huge. So does this add credibility? Well, this one I know it's proven that it does. Does this one, being on the front cover of a magazine? Again, I think you'll agree that it does, or most will. So it opens closed doors. That's what this stuff does. So the credibility, whether it's 10 timesing because you're getting the attention of influencers and having them share your stuff, or whether it's some of the stuff I just showed you, it opens closed doors. To show you how powerful the TEDx's are, I did a interview with Ami James. Well, I showed his picture earlier from Miami Inc. and an interview with Biff Naked, so Canadian music icon. Both of them at the start of their interview said, "Oh, I loved your TEDx talk." And where it was at, the only place they could have seen it was on the bottom of my email signature. But so they clicked watch my TEDx talk and watched it. What I'm getting at is there's probably a chance that the reason they said yes to the interview was because they watched my TEDx talk. So think of the added credibility it got me. And interestingly, after that, whenever we put Ami in one of our books, the Book of Why and How, he actually shared it to his on Twitter to over 2 million people. He has Tattoo-Do on Facebook, 12 million people at the time. He shared it there. So that's pretty good ad exposure, right? And I built a relationship after he saw my TEDx. Biff Naked endorsed the same book. So again, it opens closed doors. Let me ask you this. In general, does this sometimes look like your life? This is our dog, Sprocket. Now I say our dog. He passed away a few years back, but we called him Sprocket, the semi-retired rocket, because he was a little slower because he was older, but he used to be Sprocket the rocket. And this is a picture of Sprocket, what Shelly, my girlfriend, used to say was his Monday hair. And so I use that as the picture of frazzled. But basically, does this sound like you? You're going 90 miles an hour and still not reaching enough people in your perspective. You have a message that belongs on a big stage. Maybe it's a TEDx stage. You would like to work where you want and when you want. Well, what I'm about to share with you about connecting with influencers can help you do that. So here's what I'm going to cover. Some of this more, some of this less. But how to access influencers, why it matters, social proof, leverage, credibility, visibility, and how to get them all. Strategy for landing a TEDx talk. That'll be very brief today. I can't do my whole normal TEDx thing today alone. And how to land some big name endorsements. So let me ask you this question. Does everybody here know who this guy is on the screen? So Dr. Phil. I'm going to talk as I go grab my phone because I want to make sure I stay the time. I want to appreciate your guys' time, so I need to have a clock in front of me. Just realized. So let me just talk. Dr. Phil, if Dr. Phil decided that he was going to go into private practice and quote unquote retire from TV and celebrity and what have you, how many people think that Dr. Phil's clinic would be busy? I'm willing to bet you that if he was right down the road from somebody that's been there 20 years that everybody loves, that not only would his clinic be busier, that he would actually be able to charge more and have a longer waiting period. So why is that significant? That's the power of whether we want to call it influence, whether we want to call celebrity endorsement, what have you, but that's the power of this. So you'll notice I'm combining kind of two things here today. One is about you becoming the instant invisible expert, and the other is how do you reach influencers to 10 times your work in that area. But I think it's important for you to understand the power of being viewed as the expert in your business as well. And so again, think about Dr. Phil, be the Dr. Phil of your industry. And what it allows you to do is charge more, be in more demand, have people want to see you, and so on and so forth. Here's a real world example. This is a guy named Fred Connor, who I used to live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Fred had a salon there, hair salon. And Fred had got grandfathered in. He had never gone through like the cosmetology certification that you need now. He just got grandfathered in, meaning he started before that. So he was allowed to keep, cutting hair and what have you. And Fred was telling me that basically he had everybody that was in his salon was certified. So theoretically, you could say they have more technical experience, school experience than he did. But he was on a show called X-Weighted. and another show called What Not to Wear as the self-esteem expert. And as a result of that, he told me that the waiting time at times was up to 8 months for a men's haircut, longer for a woman's haircut, and his men's haircut was upwards of $100. So men were paying $100 and waiting 8 months to get in for the haircut for him. And the person, this is going back quite a few years, the person next to him theoretically was better schooled in the world of haircutting and was charging like $15. And sometimes it'd be sitting there bored. Why is that? It's the power of visibility. People knew who Fred was. They wanted to say they got a selfie with Fred. By the way, to tell you how powerful TV is for this, this week when we had Dave Hester at our event, he was saying that the reason he went on Storage Wars is because he wanted to add 50 more people to his store. He said within a couple of months, the show was a hit. They had 500 people in the store. And he said it was nothing but a nuisance because nobody wanted to buy anything. They just wanted to get selfies with him. And he said even when he tried to hide upstairs, they'd say, he can't hide up there. I can see his shadow. Tell him to come down. I want a picture with him. And what I'm saying is there's good and bad with this, but that's the power of visibility, right? Like it took him from adding 50 people to having 500 more in like a matter of a month or two. And that's sort of what Fred experienced. So having said that, how do we connect with and get in the radar of influencers, get behind the electric fence, as I like to say sometimes, while also building our own expert status? So here is a strategy. Here's your first strategy for how to do that. And it sounds crazy, but you have to connect. So what do I mean by that is you have to be creative and reach out, and you have to be creative in how you reach out. So remember I said at the first, I know some people logged in a couple minutes later, but at the first I talked about it. The hardest part was knocking over that big domino, which in this case would be the hardest influencer or the biggest one to reach when I first started. In this case, that influencer was Jack Canfield. So if you guys are probably familiar with Jack, if you're not, you're familiar, I'm sure, with Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Jack and his partner in crime, Mark Victor Hansen, were the co-creators of Chicken Soup for the Soul. So I had a podcast that wasn't even launched yet. So I had no social proof on how many listeners I'd had. And I had the nerve to reach out to Jack's team to try to get him on a show. This is a guy that's been on Larry King Live probably 5 times, been on Super Soul Sunday more than once. He's been on CNN everywhere. And here I am trying to reach out with no proof of any listenership. So for 4 months, his team would say, Corey, it's probably going to be a no. He's turning down most interviews now. He only takes 1 out of every 10. He doesn't have a book out. There's, no reason really for him to do a show, that kind of stuff. And I believed that I visualized that I believed Jack, he was on my vision board. I believed he was going to be on my show. So I didn't let up. So I started trying to think creative. I said, I'm not going to win this by saying our show is going to be huge or anything like that. I'm going to have to win this by being creative. So what I did was I started doing some searching to see who was in Jack's sphere. And so I came across this guy named Dan Sullivan, who has a brand called Strategic Coach. And so I found Dan Sullivan, Strategic Coach. And how I found him is I saw that he had endorsed Jack's work. He was on Jack's website. So then I started searching Dan to see what he was up to. And I noticed he had a recent interview with Success Magazine with Darren Hardy of Success Magazine. And he had said in the interview he liked Darren's style of interviewing. And I thought, well, this is good news because I interview in a similar style to Darren. So I reached out to Dan Sullivan's team and said, hey, I think we should bring Dan on the show. Here's a clip of mine. He likes Darren Hardy's Success Magazine interview style. I'm similar to that. Love to bring Dan on the show. And they said, basically, it sounds, sounds good. Let's get Dan scheduled on the show. So I got Dan scheduled for the show, did an hour-long interview with Dan, which we still have. We've aired multiple times. And in the interview, I mentioned Jack's name a few times. Well, lo and behold, much to my luck, Dan says something along the lines of, Corey, Jack would love this show. You should bring Jack on the show. And you know what? Tell him I said so. Now, what I had found out as I was researching to bring Dan on the show is that Jack once a year paid to go to Dan's big weekend event. Him and Mark both did separately. That's a $25,000 event. So what that meant to me is that Dan was actually Jack's coach. So Jack looked up to him. So I went to Jack's team and I took that audio clip of Dan saying, tell Jack he should be on your show. And I said, hey guys, I just want to show you that even Dan, Jack's coach, agrees with me that Jack should be on my show. The very next day, I had a link from Jack's team and said, Corey, you've beaten us into submission. Here's the link to schedule your interview with Jack. That's how I knocked down my first domino. I got creative. But if you listen in that, you hear some of the hacks there, right? Did you notice one of the hacks I said was that I went on to Jack's website to see who was endorsing him. Found out who was endorsing him. Then I did some research on the person who was endorsing him. Then I discovered that Dan liked the Success Magazine style. So I sent him proof that I interviewed in that style. And then, brought up Jack a few times thinking Dan might comment on it. And then I was able to use that clip to get Jack in the show. So I'm hoping you see there, it wasn't just creative or happenstance or luck. There was an actual strategy beyond that. So strategy for you is if you want to get a big name influencer and you're trying to reach them and you can't, go and see who endorses them. Go and see who they hang around with and see who among those you can get. Does that make sense? You guys believe in the 6 degrees of separation? If you do, what you're wanting to do is find a person that's only 1 degree away from them and get their attention. I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell you, I believe now more than I ever have in the 6 degrees of separation. And in a lot of ways, which is kind of humbling, is that I'm probably 1 degree away from every person I want to interview now, which is amazing. Like, it's mind-boggling. But that's the power of that. So, having said that, whenever you go to an influencer, so now we've talked quickly about a strategy for, first strategy, and tell you how I got my first big interview. But one of the things I want to say to you right away, and this is really important, and that's why I'm glad people keep joining us, and I want to make sure every person hears this especially, is if you're wanting to get an influencer's attention, if you're wanting to work with an influencer, this is going to sound counterintuitive perhaps, but it can't be about you. It can't be about your results. It can't be about what you want from this relationship. It can't be about you receiving. It's first and foremost got to be about a way that you can bring value, and I know that's an overused word, but you can bring value to their life. It has to be about that. It has to be about you willing to do the things for them because you believe in what they do, you're a fan of what they do, and you have to be willing to accept that the results may not come back. Interestingly enough, I find they do, but you have to go into it figuring they may not and be okay with that. So I always say that you have to deposit multiple times first before you try to withdraw from the relationship. And I had somebody reach out to me. I just shared this with people that were at Blue Talks UCLA with us last week. I had somebody reach out on LinkedIn and they said, "Hey, how's it going, Corey? Congrats on your TEDx talk." And I didn't know them. And I said, "Okay, I know where this is going." And then about 3 hours later, a message, "Hey, did you know that I can help you get more views on your TEDx talk?" And it was a pitch. And I said, sounds great. But I have a lot of relationships with people. And so I have people that I can work with that can do that. What I need more than that is a relationship. So I said, for me, it's about building a long-term business relationship, not necessarily about a pitch. And he said, "Long-term relationship, question mark?" And I thought, that's pretty sad. He doesn't know what a long-term relationship is. And anyway, I went back and said, yeah, like building a business relationship so that we both can collaborate down the road or work with each other or refer each other or to other people or what have you. And his actual response said, "Good luck with everything, Corey." And then he did one of these, like his palm to his head, like I'm somehow the strange person in this conversation. I'm like, what? Like, are relationships really like? So in other words, the point is he was trying to ask without giving. He was trying to withdraw without depositing. So Gary Vee, if you guys are familiar with Gary Vee, has a book called Jab, 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 Right Hook. If you haven't heard of it, or if you have, but you don't know what that means, actually, I'm missing a jab there, by the way. I just noticed. There should be 3 jabs. So, what that means is give, 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 and then ask. So if you look at it in social media, when Gary put the book out, what he was using it as the example of is when you're posting on social media, you should give something, give something, give something of value 3 times before you say, "Oh, by the way, I also happen to have a new book out," on your 4th post. Do you see what I mean by that? Give, 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 and then ask. So give multiple times, a ratio of 75% before you ever ask. And I think that's, if you want to get into the radar of influencers and have them want to share your stuff, that's the same approach you have to take. Give, give, give before you ask. I'll give you another real world example because I believe real stories kind of paint the picture. But I mentioned Mark Victor Hansen earlier. Mark is the co-creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Mark, I can't remember how it happened, but I had interviewed Mark twice before. But Mark had a new book coming out called Ask. And kind of ironic, I just said about, give, 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 and then ask. But Mark had a new book out called Ask, him and his wife, Crystal. And I can't remember how somebody said to me, "Hey, do you want Mark on your show?" And I'm like, "I absolutely want Mark on my show." They connected us. And so I had Mark on the show. And Mark said, I think it was live during the interview, he said, "Corey, we're doing our podcast rounds now, like a podcast tour. if you want to connect me with any podcasters you think we would be a good fit for the show and enhance their show, I would love the connection. Well, in the next week, I flooded Mark and Crystal with 25 podcasts. And by the way, more than one of those podcasts had 3+ million listeners. So I basically said, hey, Mark is, and I went to him first to make sure he's okay with them. But anyway, I think I overwhelmed them because like a couple months later, I asked Mark, I said, I have a big show I want to connect you with. He said, we're on a break right now because we've done a lot of podcasts. So I think I might have overwhelmed him with the 25. But the point is, he asked and said, can you help me with this? And by the way, let's be honest, that's a win-win, right? Would you agree that for people that are running a podcast, getting Mark Victor Hansen on when he has a new book out is probably a win for them too, for most people? So I was helping people I knew that had podcasts get a great guest. I was helping Mark get a guest spot to help talk about their new book, but I never asked for anything. And then I reached out again and we were doing a documentary and I told Mark about it and said I want to have him involved. We interviewed him for the documentary. Then I reached out and did something else and promoted him. But I wasn't planning to say it that many times, but that's my 3, I guess, gives. And then we were doing our Blue Talks MIT event earlier this year. And I reached out to Mark and said, Mark, we're doing a mastermind the day before our Harvard event. I was wondering if you'd be willing to be kind of our guest keynote speaker. And long story short is Mark agreed to do that. And normally, I mean, I won't tell you his fees. That's not my place to do. But his fees are pretty high normally to do something like that. But did you see what I did there? I gave and gave and gave without ever asking. By the way, the first thing I did after Mark did that for us is then I gave him again something else. So I want you to get in the giver's mindset if you want to get on the radar of people who can 10 times your business. Oh, and here we are. This is Mark and Crystal here. I forgot they were on the slide. So here is the second piece. So I said connect is the first step. The second thing is once you've made enough connections, then you can actually work with the power of leverage. How many people here have heard the term leverage? I mean, I'm sure we've all heard the term, but in business, to me, leverage is that like lever that you basically can now maximize what you're doing by leaning on the things you've already done. And so why I put Mark and Crystal here is think about what I told you earlier about me getting Jack, and he was the first big domino. So now remember I told you I interviewed Dan Sullivan, and I said that Jack and Mark both went to Dan's big event. So they both obviously worked with Dan and fans of him. And then I landed Jack. So now let's say I have Jack and Dan's interviews both on our show. So now, would you guys agree at this point? It becomes a lot easier after I've done that to then go to Mark Victor Hansen and say, hey, Mark, we had Jack on the show. We had Dan on the show, 2 of your buddies. We'd love to have you in the show. And literally, after we did that, Mark's response, this is kind of funny that I said it like that, but Mark's response was, oh yeah, we'd love to be on the show with our friends. I want you to think of that terminology. We'd love to be in the show with our friends. That's the power of leverage. So once you do the work to connect and that push that big domino over, it gets easier because now you have more dominoes over and you can leverage that to get the next one. So, now I said I reached out to Gary Vee and it was a no many times. I reached out to Deepak Chopra and it was no many times. When it became a yes, I would say it's because I built enough of those dominoes that were knocked over that they looked and finally said, you know what? Yeah, this guy's interviewing a lot of influencers. He's making some waves. I want to be one of the next people that jumps into that same platform. But again, power of leverage. And then positioning. Now, this is really too busy, and that was intentional. This banner, I showed you one earlier that wasn't as busy as this. This was intentional to overwhelm you, almost to say, like, so we had a lead generation company that we ended up going with that was reaching out to us, and they had like 200 testimonials on their website, video testimonials. And I watched like 3 of people I knew, and then I just was like, okay, that's enough of that. But my point is, it beat me into submission. I'm like, if they have 200 testimonials, chances are you can trust them to work with. And so this is way too busy because I want to demonstrate that I ran out of room. Literally, I still ran out of room. And look at some of the big names that are on there. So this is the positioning side, the social proof, if you want to call that. I mentioned the picture of me and Matthew McConaughey. That's positioning. That's social proof. I'm on a roll. Like I'm right now, I decided to start posting pictures. I'm going to start using quotes by the people that I've interviewed. But today I put up Henry Winkler, the Fonz, and he had a great quote that, what did he say to me? There's no nutritional value in negative thinking, which I love that quote. And then I had Dave Hester up the other day, Dave Thomas, who was on SCTV and a bunch of shows in Canada. So my point is that's all positioning. Maybe so. One of my as a speaker, one of the things I talk to is the timeless secrets of influential leaders. So what have I learned from thousands of influencers, like what Napoleon Hill did with Think and Grow Rich? What did I learn from thousands of influencers that you can use in your life? And so to be positioned at that as that guy, part of the tagline is he's interviewed thousands of thought leaders, so you don't have to. So part of that positioning is those photos, the relationships I've had, the interviews with thought leaders. And then also, like I said, these logos kind of demonstrate where I've sort of been. And so that's positioning. We talked about the SENOM banner, increase your credibility. It also positions you in a certain way as well. And it's also known as social proof. So it's the proof that others go, oh, it's like McDonald's. Whether you like McDonald's or not, you guys might remember the sign at the top that used to say billions and billions served. You guys remember that? I don't know if they still have that, but they used to have that. I remember Jerry Seinfeld on his comedy show one time did a joke and he said, billions and billions of serves. Why are they still counting? Are they hoping the cows will walk up in submission and say, all right, you sold us. We know we have no chance out here. He said, I think what they're really trying to do is convince me that it's okay to buy a burger there. All right, you sold billions. I trust you. I'll take one. And that was the social proof. They were trying to say, look, billions of people or billions of burgers have been sold. You can trust us. Now, whether you do or not, it's your own choice. I'm just saying that's the social proof side of it and positioning. So what's the benefit of these things? Connecting with influencers, leveraging to get on their radar, positioning yourself in a certain way and having that social proof. You'll notice I have abundance second because I think the impact is really what we're more looking for. And by the way, abundance can be money or non-money. It can be just having more wealth in your life or what have you. But impact, I think, is what most of us are looking for, to impact other people's lives. And what I'm talking about today will help you influence more lives because you can reach more lives, both if you position yourself as an expert and if you get the attention of influencers who can share your work as well. It just increases your reach, thereby increasing your impact. And of course, that also relates to more abundance. Again, what you decide, whether that's financial to you or abundance in terms of a rich and healthy life, but more abundance. So going more into strategy, but how do you do it? So as far as I talked podcasting earlier, here's another quote unquote creative strategy that I use to get on a big show called The One Thing. At one point, it was one of the biggest podcasts of all time. It's still pretty big. You may have heard of the book. It sold like 4 million copies now, I think. It's called The One Thing as well. And anyway, it was a big show that I listened to a lot. And I thought, how am I going to get in this show? And so we reached out, Shelly reached out back when she was working for me as I won't say virtual assistant, as my assistant. But anyway, she reached out about me being on The One Thing. And they said, thanks for reaching out to us here at The One Thing. Can you give me more background regarding Corey and The One Thing? Has he read the book or know about us here? We want to make sure he's the right fit for our brand. So what Corey did was the next event he was speaking at, which was a couple of days later, he happened to have, don't worry, I won't speak in their person very often, but I happened to have the book with me on the road and I was reading it actually again. I had already read it once. And so I decided, you know what I'm going to do at this event that I'm running? I'm going to take a picture of everybody doing this because that's what The One Thing did. That was kind of the way they did it for their show. And people sent pictures in like that. And I'm going to show all these people that were in my audience while I'm holding the book, The One Thing. So we sent this picture to them maybe 2 days after that email. They sent a booking link back and said, okay, Corey knows about The One Thing, we're in, and then booked the show. So again, hopefully you see creativity is what I was trying to employ there. So it's another strategy for how I got on their radar. I had to get their attention first, but once I did, that was how I had convinced them. And so here's the great part is that there's a way. So you need to have here. So one thing I wanted to mention earlier, I'll mention it here because I'm going to cover off becoming an expert and getting the name of big name influencers all in one slide. But one of the things I didn't mention is you have to have a reason to reach out. This is where a lot of people fall down. You can't reach out on your Twitter DM to Tony Robbins and expect that anything's going to happen. But you have to have a reason to reach out. You have to have a benefit for whoever it is. You have to have a reason why you're saying, hey, can I get some of your time? Now, some people have been able to successfully say, I need a mentor, and reach out and say, can you give me some advice on this? And been lucky and have that person say, you know what, I want to help this person and do that. But that's rare. So you have to have a real reason of what's in it for them as to why they would say yes. And my experience is probably, some people may not want to hear this because it takes some work, but probably the best way, and it's how I did it, to make that happen is to have a platform of some sort. It doesn't have to be a podcast, but it can be. It could be a magazine, online, digital. It could be that you write for it. It could just be that you write a guest column for a magazine and you want to write a column about that. You might even say, I write for Brains Magazine and I'd like to write an article on you. But you have to have something that you can give them. Another option, by the way, but you still have to have a what's in it for them or why they would connect with you, is if you have their book, for instance, and you're a fan, take screenshots of parts of their book you like, highlight it, and then for 10 days, post something from their book and say why you like it and tag them in. I bet you're going to get their attention after 10 days. But again, you have to have a reason for why you gained their attention. Because you might only get them retweeting and saying, oh my gosh, thanks so much for all the love this week. And now you got your one chance. But what I'm getting at is that's a creative way to get the attention, but you have to have a reason for the why. So whether that's, and by the way, it could be simply, so you could start this today. It could be simply that you want to do a monthly or a weekly Facebook Live. The great part about that is you can say, I'm doing a Facebook Live, and you don't have to actually do it unless they say yes. Versus a podcast where you have to have ongoing podcasts to be able to say, yeah, here's my podcast, if that makes sense. So I'm just saying it doesn't have to be something where it's very formal and like, because podcasting is a lot more work than almost anybody thinks when they first start it. So I don't recommend you start there, but that's one option. So the other option now, so that's if you want to get the influencer's attention, you have to have a reason to reach out and a what's in it for them. Because that's your give, by the way, when I said giving first. The other side of that is if you want to become an expert, one of the easiest ways today is podcasting. Get on a podcast. You don't have to do as much work. You can just show up and bring your magical self and deliver some magic. Here are some of the places where you can find podcasting interviews right away. And by the way, going back to my As Seen on banner earlier, if you do 10 of these podcasts, like you book 10 small podcasts and ask for the logos from the people you do the podcast with, if you do that and get those 10 logos, there's your As Seen on banner. Done. Just like that. So that's why I say you could have it done in less than a month. So radio guest list.com. Some of you have heard this from me before. If you have, disregard. But if you go to radioguestlist.com, top right-hand corner, unless it's changed since I was there, there should be a place to enter your email. And every day for free, they'll start sending you, I'll call it an email. Well, it's just going to be an email. I was going to say a different name, but it's going to be an email where they say they're looking for guests. So they'll send you on Radio Guest List, you'll sign up, and every day you'll get like an email saying these 5 podcasters are looking for guests. And literally all you have to do is send an email and say, here's why I should be on your show. By the way, it's free. So that's a way to freely get access to podcasts immediately. Interview guest directory, I think it's .com as well, is their sister site. You can go on there and be listed for somewhere between $5 and $15. I think it is, might be $5 a month and then 15 if you want to boost it. But basically you have your own page now that you can use for all of your media. But what's cool about that is then they send that page out to all of the media that's a part of their directory. So in other words, if like CBS Radio, I got on CBS Radio and Forbes Books Radio because of that interview guest directory. I literally had a profile. They liked what they saw. They reached out to me. I didn't even have to do any work. Again, I think it's $5 a month to be a member, or I think it's $15 if you want to have a profile with your photo or boost it or whatever. Radio guest list is free, and every guest directory, you can have a free profile. But again, I would recommend whatever it is, $5 or $10 or $15, because you can get photo and a bunch more stuff. Another thing you can do if you want to be on podcasts, if you want to be very specific to make sure you're on the right podcast, because I always say you're better to have 100 of the right listeners listening to you on a podcast than 500,000 of the wrong listeners. So if you want to be on the right ones for your industry, figure out which industry is closely related to an Apple category, and then search the top 100 or top 200 in that Apple category. For instance, my new talk about how to find your purpose earlier in life is I tap into that schools could play a part in that. And so I'm going to be reaching out to the top education podcasts to get on those. So in other words, if you're health and wellness, go to the top Apple podcasts in health and wellness and reach out to those, because that's your target market. Listen Notes isn't going to get you any podcast appearances or anything, but Listen Notes is a great resource because you can go on listennotes.com, spelled like I have it there, and type in the name of any podcast or a podcast. You can test it with Joe Rogan if you want. And you'll see when you do that, it'll show you a percentage. It'll say like top one, it'll say 1% or 5% or 20 or what have you. If there's no percentage, that means the show is not charting high enough to get any percentage yet. The lower the percentage, the bigger the show. So one of our shows is a 1.5% show. That means it's in the top 1.5% of all shows globally. So the lower the percentage, the bigger the show. It just tells you if you're trying to target and make sure that the shows you're on have a lot of listeners, it'll help you do that. Because if you go on 100 shows that aren't listing at all, they don't have any percentage, that means you're going on maybe 100 shows that each have maybe 5 or 6 or 7 listeners per episode. Well, again, 100 of the right is better than a million of the wrong. But 100 shows, if you're doing a half hour per show, 50 hours of your time is a lot to only reach 15 people or 18 or 20, when you could do that on a Facebook Live in 2 minutes. So what I'm saying is listen notes will tell you at least if it's a bigger show. But I would look at anything as 20% or lower as a big show. Podcast guest collaboration is a Facebook community. I'll just say that one, feel free to check it out. The one fear I have about that one is the last time I looked, I think there was 40,000 people on there. So there'll be a person put up that they're looking for a guest, and then they have 700 people say, I'd be a great guest. So I don't know about you, but that to me is not the place I want to compete to be on somebody's show. It's just the odds are slim. You have to be first in, and that means you have to spend all your time there. I'm not interested in that. But what it will do is it'll tell you about shows. It'll maybe tell you about shows that could be a good fit for you. And maybe when they post, reach out to them privately. Like that's a strategy, is instead of commenting on their post saying looking for guests, reach out to them on their own through their website or Facebook Messenger or email, and you'll stand out and maybe explain why you might be a good fit. And maybe you'll stand out over the other ones that are all commenting below the post. So that's what I would recommend. So, one of the ways not to do it in terms of building your branding and your visibility, in my opinion, take this with a grain of salt. If you've done this, don't blame the messenger, and also don't think I'm necessarily right. It's just my personal opinion. But you may have heard of press release services. These are services that'll send out a press release for you for, say, $250, and they send it to like ABC, NBC, what have you. And then the claim is that you can now say as seen on ABC, NBC, what have you. For me, I struggle with this because of the authenticity of it. A lot of people don't realize this, but what they do is they send a generic press release out to the back end of those pages. So for example, it won't be on ABC or an ABC affiliate on the main site. I won't be able to search on there and find you. It goes on a backlink. And to my understanding, the affiliate gets paid, but it goes on a backlink that sits there where people can't find it by searching. You have to send them the link, and then eventually it becomes a dead link where it disappears. So the whole purpose is to say you're seen on NBC, but nobody will see you on NBC. And so I struggle with that. So again, I'm not judging you. And by the way, if you're a part of our Blue Talks brand, you don't even have to listen to this, because you know yourself, you're already going to have enough logos and you're going to already be on enough platforms that you already have this stuff covered anyway. But I'm just saying this right here, just, all these let you decide. For me, it was important for me to actually be on those platforms to put them on. But again, I'm not judging if somebody chooses otherwise. I just want you to know that it exists and be aware of it. I put Tom Hanks up here because one of the things that they do, which, this is another way to position yourself, and not everybody does it, but Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, one of the things you'll notice is you hardly ever see them on the news on a daily basis. Like you might see Paris Hilton on TMZ Daily or whatever. You won't see Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. The only time they appear is when they have something to promote. That's a totally different approach. So they're not famous just for being famous. They position themselves that I have a new book out, I have this, I'm going to come out of the woodwork and do this stuff. And then they go back into the woodwork. So I'm saying this because you don't have to always be on to get this kind of expertise and visibility and what have you. So landing a brand of talk, I'm going to go through this really quickly as we start to wind down so I can do a few Q&As. Landing a brand of talk, here's some quick strategy for how you could land a TEDx or similar talk and how some of our students have. One of the things you can do is you can post on social media that you're thinking of doing a talk and here's what it's about, and then asking for feedback. So in other words, I'm thinking of doing this talk about the 21 days to do this. What do you guys think of this? And post it on, say, Facebook. And what'll happen typically is you'll get a lot of responses. People say, I like this, I don't like this. So you're going to A, get feedback right away if it's the right talk for you. And then B, what could happen, which does happen, is you'll have somebody in your network that either is a TEDx organizer or knows one that'll say, oh my God, you need to reach out to Marita or Sandra and talk to them about their TEDx talk. Or they reach out to you and say, hey, I didn't know you wanted to do a TEDx talk. Let's chat. We were running an event in a couple months. So the other thing you can do is, on top of saying, what do you think of this talk idea for a TEDx or a similar stage, you can even add the caveat or follow up the next day and say, hey, who do I know in my network that knows a TEDx organizer they can connect me with? It's so easy. And so many people don't do it. And we're also 1 degree away, like I said earlier, that it makes sense to do this. So that's one thing you can do. And then it'll tell you whether or not it's the right talk. It'll tell you, it might help you reach a TEDx organizer, and they're already going to know what you're speaking on. The other thing, actually I'll go here, Yeah, the other thing you can do is you can find out who the organizer is. I don't have time to take you all through this, but if you go to TED.com, search the event you want to speak at the bottom, usually of when you find the event, it'll tell you the organizer's name. Then go to Google, search the event name and find their website. Do a bit of research, make sure they are the organizer, and then you can go on LinkedIn and do a search and find that organizer. And then basically you connect with them, start sharing their stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, you get on their radar. And where you go from there, you could either reach out directly and say, hey, I see you're involved in TEDx, whatever. I'd love to speak on that stage, wondering what the process is for submitting. And if you're lucky, they'll say, oh, you just submit to here and let me know when you do, and I'll watch out for your TEDx talk. Or the other scenario is you can follow them for a month or two, share their stuff, and then reach out and say, hey, I've been following you. I noticed you're involved in TEDx, whatever. I'll leave that for you to decide. But those strategies have worked for clients many, many times. I mean, obviously, I'm sharing with you guys what sometimes we deliver as an 8-week program in about 10 seconds. So I'm just sharing you some quick hacks, but it is a way to get on their radar, and it is stuff you can start doing tomorrow. Delivering a branded talk, one of the things I always tell people about the importance is so many people focus on content. If you guys have ever heard the expression content is king, I agree that it is, but I'm going to say also emotional connection is queen, and the queen rules almost every castle I've ever walked into. So don't forget about the queen, meaning deliver great content. You want to do the content, but also connect with your audience, whether it's on something like this. You notice I've been asking questions, I've been telling stories. So connect with your audience is just as important as having great content. And let me ask you this, if you had the choice, you don't have to answer this. If you had the choice to have a speaker, watch a speaker who is decent or good, let's say good. You watch a speaker who's good and very dynamic, engaging, great storyteller, versus a speaker who's brilliant, but boring, can't tell a story, and is all stats. Which one would you take? When I ask that question, almost 8 days a week, as the Beatles would say, people tell me they'd rather have the dynamic speaker that keeps them in the moment, that engages, that asks them questions, than the boring one who's brilliant. So yes, content's important, but don't forget the emotional connection. So that's when you're delivering a talk from that kind of stage. And then the last component is, how do you secure, this is one more little round of strategy. How do you secure these big name interviews, these big name endorsements, whatever that is? This is James and Kate here, Jack. But how you do it is, first of all, you give, as I mentioned earlier. So find out what's in it for them. Find out how you can give to them. I'll also say, how many people here know who Steve Martin is, the comedian? Steve Martin has a great book I recommend called Born Standing Up. In that book, he shares a quote that I think has been a tribute to many people. And maybe Steve, I don't know if Steve created it, but I know I've heard him, he coined it multiple times. And his quote was, be so good, they can't ignore you. So how does that relate to this? Well, James Redfield here in the top left, again, he wrote the book called The Celestine Prophecy. If you haven't heard of it, it sold 38, I think now, million copies that they know of. It also, they say 80 million people have read it when you factor in used bookstores and giveaway copies. And James, how I ended up building a relationship with James that, ended up evolving to us working on a documentary together, me staying at his place when we were working on the documentary, becoming like legit friends. How that all started is I asked him interview questions and he said, you asked me stuff that I've never shared in interviews before. I want to do another interview. And then we did another one and another one. And we built a relationship as we were doing more interviews. But the hope is that I showed up so good that he couldn't ignore me with the interview. So I came prepared. I asked questions that weren't just like, if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? And I'm not saying that's a bad question if you ask that question, but that's again the approach I took. So be so good they can't ignore you. And so here's again some strategy around how you can get on the radar of a big name organizer. So one of the big ones is know this, or influencers are more apt to connect with you, do interviews, get on a call with you when they have a new book coming out. Books are one of the biggest times that they'll jump on and do more media and all that kind of stuff, whether it's media or they'll make more time for people. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean they're focused on letting everybody know about this book. And so what you can do is you can go on Amazon. It's a little known fact. And you can search coming soon books and go backwards. Like, I don't know how far it goes back, at least a year. And so what you can do, which is very powerful, is the bigger names. If you find out they have a book coming out in a year, you want to be reaching out to their publicists now, because 3 months out, they've already got all their stuff scheduled. I missed a really big name author by a week. I went out and she said, Corey, if you would have reached out a week ago, we would have done it for sure. And I was about 2 months before the book came out. So what I'm saying is use the feature on Amazon coming soon and reverse engineer it. Find out what books are coming out in the near future. And when you see a book and somebody's coming out that you want to reach out with the purpose of sharing their book. So you decide how you do that, what platform you have, what have you, but that's a feature you can use on Amazon. Another feature I've used, and I can tell you what I used it recently to land 3 big interviews in 24 hours, is called hunter.io. So it's not .com.io, hunter.io. I think it's free for 25. You can do 25 searches, and then I think it goes up from there. Like, in other words, I think it's like $25 maybe a month if you want unlimited. I don't know the pricing. I just know that I don't pay much, and I think it's free for a bit. But anyway, hunter.io, I was at VCon, which you guys, if you've heard of Gary Vee, he has a big conference every year. He's only done it 2 years, I think. He's doing the third one next May, I think, or March. I can't remember now. But anyway, I was at the event, and I found out a day before the event, I didn't know this, but we were allowed to reach out to the people we wanted to interview that were going to be speaking there. I thought we had to wait for them to arrange it. I didn't think we were allowed to reach out. So I found out with 24 hours notice. And so what I did was I went on to hunter.io. And so what you do with hunter.io is when you get there, it's a search bar like Google, and you drop the website of the person you want to reach into hunter.io. And what it'll do is it'll search for any emails it can find associated with that website. So this could be an email from 3 months ago, and it even shows you a percentage of likelihood it's still a good email, and it shows you where it drugged the email from the web, on the web. So why this is significant is because instead of you going to a website where it has a form to fill out, you might see like jim@deepakchopra.com. So now all of a sudden you're reaching out to a real person who's getting a real email. And so what I did was I reached out with 24 hours notice, and I was able to secure an interview with John Taffer from Bar Rescue, who I showed you guys earlier. Tom Bilyeu, if you guys know who he is, Impact Theory. He speaks on Brendan Burchard's stage. He owned Quest, which he sold for almost $500 million, Quest Vitamin. But Tom Bilyeu, and then who was the third one? The third one was the Dog Whisperer, Cesar Millan. And what I'm saying is I was able to reach them in less than 24 hours using this website. So I went there, searched their .com. It gave me the email addresses I needed to reach out. This one here is around a website called Contact Any Celebrity. 59,000, I think they boast celebrities, contact info, publicist, email address, what have you. I think they charge, this one's the only one that really charges any amount regularly, and it's only $39 a month. But I've been able to get, when I said I had a no from Hugh Jackman and Jillian Michaels, that's how I got that info, was through Contact Any Celebrity. I got Hugh Jackman's publicist and talked with her and chatted with her on Zoom, and it started with Contact Any Celebrity. So it's just another site you can go to find the contact info. And it's also a great site if you're launching a book to go. If you want to mail copies, spilled water on myself. If you want to mail copies to an influencer that you might have a book club like Reese Witherspoon or whoever. And so what's the benefit of this? Again, going to earlier, you can 10 times everything you're doing. So hopefully I've made the case earlier that whenever you put a book out, like our Blue Talks book, and you have a big name thought leader endorse it or write the foreword, whenever you have somebody like I mentioned, Ami James earlier, sharing your message with 12 million people about your book, you can probably understand how that 10 times is your ability to reach people. And that's the power of connecting with influencers. And the last thing is you may have been overwhelmed by thinking about all this stuff, whether it's posting, whether it's reaching out. One of the things that I think is brilliant, and I got to get a better picture of Brendan on here, but one of the things that I think is brilliant is what Brendan Burchard does. So Brendan Burchard, for creating content, is known as a machine. How he does it, for those that don't know, is Brendan actually creates Monday. They record, like, let's say a 1-hour video with him and his team. And then what they do is they put that out as a full video on YouTube on his Peak Performance channel, which is, I think, for a while was the #1 peak performance channel on all of YouTube. But then he also takes shorter clips and posts them as separate clips throughout the week. They also take image quotes where they put quotes from that same interview. Basically, they take that 1-hour interview and they create all their content for a week. But if you think about it, Brendan has a team, but all he has to do is spend 1 hour and then they have content for the whole week. Versus what a lot of us do and go, oh, I should put this up right now. Oh, I should put that up. Oh, I should comment on this. So whether you hire a VA to do it or whether you even do it yourself, it's still quicker and easier than trying to start from scratch and create new content. But anyway, so you can repurpose the stuff. And don't forget, you can put up something that you put up a while ago. I said today I put up a picture of Henry Winkler, the Fonz. Well, that photo's from a while back. That's not a new photo. You can repurpose the stuff. And most people won't remember because we're all too busy. So having said that, well, I hope that you take action on this stuff you've heard today. I know I jumped around a couple different ways. This is a brand new presentation, but I really want to give you guys value on how, if your goal is to become an expert and an instant expert, what have you, you've got some strategy there. If your goal is to reach influencers, you've got some strategy there. But the one thing I hope you don't do is do the same thing over and over again and expect that you're going to have different results. Ultimately, you have to make change. So if you showed up because you want impact, if you showed up because you want to be on bigger stages, if you want to be seen as the expert and build an expert lifestyle, then, honestly, it's about taking action. It really is. So I told you that I was going to share one or two quick things. I don't know if I have more. Yeah. Well, I'll just finish by saying it's important to do all this stuff because the world needs your voice. Before I go back a step, I said that at the beginning. The world needs your voice desperately, and it needs more of you because we already have Tony Robbins. We already have Lisa Nichols. People always say to me when I start working with them on speaking more, I want to be the next Tony Robbins. Well, guess what, guys? It's already taken. And he's already doing a good job of it, whether you like him or not. He's already crushing it in his business. So why not become the first Susan Binney? Become the first you. So the last thing I want to tell you about, and then I'm going to do a bit of Q&A. And like I said, I'm going to tell you about something you can jump in for free if you want to join us, get some great training, no cost to you. But the other thing I want to tell you about, some of you guys have been hearing about this. We just shared that we're going to be launching this. I've been having people come to me forever asking me to launch something like this, and I've resisted it over and over again. People wanting me to launch a speakers bureau. I've had no interest because of the model, like a speakers bureau traditionally, and it's not a bad or good thing. But if they have, say, Les Brown on their bureau, they have access to Les and Brian Tracy, and let's say Les charges $50,000, and you come on, and you're charging maybe $2,000, and you're new. What do you think is going to happen? In most cases, if they can book less out, they're going to get paid more because they take a percentage. They're probably going to book less more often than maybe you. And so with the speakers bureau, usually it's the last person in is kind of the last. Last person in is I hate to say it, but often gets the scraps. So I didn't want that. So ultimately, people have been asking me for this for years, and I've resisted it for years. What we've decided to do, and again, I know some of you on here already know about this, but we've decided that we're going to launch a thing called the Experts Bureau, which is different than a speakers bureau, and I'll tell you how in a second. And again, you can't sign up for this today, so just know, as I say this, don't feel you have to jump off. I'm not asking for your credit card or anything today. I just want to share with you what we're doing. But basically, because I've been asked for this so often, what we decided that we're going to do is we're going to launch an Experts Bureau, which is going to be a monthly thing versus with a speakers bureau, what happens is usually you pay them a percentage of the booking. Now, again, that seems great in theory because you're like, well, I don't have to pay anything, and I just pay them if they get something for me. But you might be with them for a year and they not get anything for you. And that to me is no better than not being with them. And so the idea here is what we're going to do is I have a system that I use to get over 200 paid bookings, paid speaking engagements in multiple years. Now, by the way, not everybody wants 200 paid bookings, and I don't anymore either. I have 2 young kids. I wouldn't do 200 again. But that's how many bookings I was able to get using a proprietary system that I stumbled upon, and I haven't heard anybody else ever talk about it. And and some of the people here know the system, and when I share it, they always say, "Oh, I never heard of that before." And so I decided, why not, instead of them relying on people to get the system set up themselves, I decided what we're going to do, and we're actually doing interviews this week for VAs. We're going to hire 2 VAs. And basically what they're going to do is they're going to use my system for how to reach the actual person who hires speakers, know how much they pay, and to reach them directly. And they're basically going to reach out daily to they're going to be probably doing it like 6 hours a day via email. So you can imagine how many people are going to reach. And it's only targeted people that hire speakers, and we know they pay speakers. And we're going to go by industries as well. We're going to do niche markets and stuff. And they're going to reach out and say, hey, we have some speakers. We run this Experts Bureau. We're running, if you run events this year, if you're running any events this year, if you're looking for speakers. And the reason we're doing it that way is rather than pitching one speaker, they might say, well, yeah, we need 5 speakers for our upcoming event. So we're going to basically do the work of finding the paid speaking engagements for you. We're also going to do, the plan I think I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe bring on a third person for part-time, and we're going to have them reach out for like summits and stuff like that. Some people, I've had people say to me, I don't care about paid. I just care that they're in this certain industry, or you may want to sell from the stage. So we're going to reach out for those. But that other third person, I'm planning to have them do media as well. So reach out for media appearances, interviews, talk shows, podcast spots. And so you'll have both in that. So the idea is we're going to bring you either or podcast interviews or interviews, writing opportunities, speaking opportunities. Essentially, we're going to do the work for you to bring that stuff to you. And then on top of that, we're going to do monthly training. So every month we're going to be training like how to sell from the stage, if you should be charging and what you should be charging, how to know how much to charge for a deposit. When I first started, I did this big talk. It was a $40,000 engagement total. It was over 2 months. And I didn't get a contract signed and I didn't ask for a deposit. And they didn't pay me till 6 months later. I was in my first year. You can imagine what that dent that took in my career because I didn't know to ask for a deposit. And I talked to the guy later. He said, Corey, we desperately wanted what you're doing. I would have forced them to give you a deposit and give you the rest the day of. But because you didn't ask, now we're in the system of they pay suppliers in 180 days. Well, 90 to 180 is what it was. So my point is we're going to teach people how to actually run a speaking business, give you access to our valuation form, our contracts that we use. If you get a booking to help you sign the contract, monthly, like I say, we're going to do trainings. We're going to do what meeting planners look for. We're going to do how to land your TEDx. That program of mine sells for $4,750, $4,750. We're going to include it as not the whole program, but I'm going to do a monthly one on that. We're going to also do on how to sell from the stage. I think I know who's going to do it. She was just at our Blue Talks event and her and I were chatting about it. She's going to do how to sell from the stage. And she just did an event, I think she said 2 weeks ago, where she walked away with $30,000 she sold in the room in one event, and she was like the 45-minute presenter. So we're going to do the trainings once a month and then also help you get the bookings. The only thing we're going to ask of people, it's going to be either monthly or pay the year up front. If they pay the year up front, they get 2 months free. So it'll be 10 months. If they pay monthly, either way, I guess, but if they pay monthly, it's a year commitment either way. So they have to commit to a year. And the reason I say that is because the front end work is going to be harder for us. We're going to be putting a lot of it in the front end. And so I want to make sure the person's there with us long enough, they can both see the result and it's fair to us that's doing all the front end. Because what we're going to have to do is, and we're working on this stuff already, but we're going to have to build the website where we're listing your profile. We're putting your video to say your speaking topics, all that kind of stuff. We're going to have to build that front end. We're probably going to end up doing flyers for people as well. We're going to have to, for those that don't have videos, we might have to help you figure out how to get your video. Good news for Blue Talks people, you already have the video or you're going to have it soon. So we have the video we can use already to when they say we need to see a video. If you've been in the book, we can say you're a best-selling author. So it's kind of a next evolution of Blue Talk because we already have all the stuff that we can use as the bureau to promote you as a speaker. But yeah, so it's going to be a year-long commitment, but we put the pricing at a level it shouldn't be when you consider the TEDx program is $4,750 on its own. And I was just on with somebody today and she said, Corey, your pricing is too low. And I know that. And just to back that up, basically what we're going to be doing is Blue Talks people get a bit of a discount. But for everybody that's not a Blue Talks member, we're going to be doing $275 a month. And to put that in perspective, I have a friend of mine who some of you know, and I won't say his name because some of you know him. Actually, the lady who's going to do the sell from the stage and him both separately met through a group they signed up for, who said, we're going to get you bookings. And they charged $1,500 a month US. And he was with them for 3 months and they never even pitched him to anybody. And finally, she said, whenever they came to her, they actually wanted her to pay to do a presentation, yet they hadn't gotten her any paid bookings yet. And she's paying $1,500 a month. So, when I say we're charging $275, it's when you compare, put it this way, what our goal will be, because a lot of people ask me, well, how much can you even charge as a speaker? Our goal will be to, within a very short amount of time, get you to at least a minimum of $2,000 per booking, which would be like a 45-minute keynote. Business speakers, business celebrity speakers can be 5 to 10,000 quite regularly. But if you're brand new, because some people are brand new, our goal is to fast track you to get you to $1,000 or $2,000 of booking right away. Reason I say that is if you're under $1,000, it's looked at like an honorarium and you're not taken as seriously as a speaker. Now, the only exception to that is if you're doing a no-fee talk. If you're doing a talk for free, you're doing a talk for free. It's viewed differently. But if you're charging $200, it's actually worse than doing it for free. So that's why we want to get people to $1,000 quickly, as quickly as possible. And some of the people that are with Blue Talks with us, you already have the as seen on Apple, Roku, or you're going to have it soon if you don't now. Apple, Roku, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that stuff. You already have the stuff we can leverage to get you to that level really quickly. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. Like I said, it's called the Blue Talks Experts Bureau. We're literally getting the website created as I live and breathe. In fact, I was going to show you a website today, but it's a mess. It doesn't look good enough to show anybody yet. I was going to show it to you, but I'm not. But it's basically the plan is, in a perfect world, we're going to do a soft launch next week. The one last thing I should tell you on it really quickly is one of the things about this is when we do the soft launch, I should have mentioned this too. When people sign up, we'll need them to sign up because we need to start building everything. and we need to start getting the VA ready and all that stuff. But what we're going to do is we're going to give everybody a month free in the back end, because we feel it'll probably take a few weeks until it's, some of the bugs are worked out. So we're basically giving you a free month. You sign up, let's say now, and then you get a 13th month for free, whether you go by the year or you go by the month for the first year. Because again, we recognize the first few weeks, we're having to get stuff from you and build everything. So I said all my piece there. The only thing I'm going to ask for you guys, if it is something you think you'd be interested in, because again, it's going to be as early as next week. I do have a magic number that I'm thinking of taking in this, because I do want to be able to give a certain amount of bookings out to each person. And I say that, I mean, the one thing I'll say is there's not a guarantee. There's never a guarantee in the life, because we never know, right? People ask me, oh, am I guaranteed to land my TEDx talk? Well, you have to do the work. You have to pick up the, you have to do the heavy lifting. We have to do things right. And it's not that there's a guarantee, but if you know me at all, I like succeeding and I want good testimonials from you. So I have a vested interest to make sure you succeed in this. So as far as that goes, I want us to have time to build it up properly. And at the same time, my goal is to bring you paid speaking engagements. Some people that won't matter as much. They want podcasting. And by the way, there's podcasting services that charge $1,500 a month to land you on 3 podcasts a month. So you're going to get that as part of it. So the only question I have today whatsoever is if this sounds interesting to you, and I know some of the people already here on here already told me that it did. If this sounds interesting to you, put even in the chat a yes, just we'll keep it easy, but put a yes in the chat. And then what I'll do is I'll save the chat, maybe screenshot it too, and then I'll know to reach out to you as soon as it's live. So we can talk more about it. And I also want to tell you the price, because you're probably like me, you hate when somebody says, let's jump on a call, and then you find out the price. So I wanted you to know the price right up front. So we can talk more about that later. I just wanted to share that with you. The last thing I want to share, and then I know I'm a little bit over time, because I want my presentation side to be an hour and it was a little bit over. But I will do a Q&A for those that can stick around for a few minutes. And by the way, don't forget to save the chat at the bottom. If you don't know how, let me know when we're doing the Q&A. The only other thing I want to tell you about, which is also, this one's absolutely free for you, is if you don't know about our Experts Bootcamp coming up on October 13th to 15th, definitely feel free to grab a spot in that. I'm going to put the link in for you, but I think we set up a short link now. But the Experts Bootcamp, just so you guys know, I'm finding the link as I'm talking, so I might sound distracted. It's just so I can get this page up for you to put the link in. But the Experts Bootcamp, we do it usually every 3 or 4 months. And the one coming up, we have Neil Donald Walsh, if you guys are familiar with him, who wrote Conversations with God, sold, I don't know, I think 15 million copies of his book. He's going to be talking all things books with us. We're also going to have Anthony Truxo, I mentioned earlier, American Ninja Warrior, NFL linebacker. We're going to have, by the way, we're going to have David Hancock, who's the publisher of Morgan James Publishing, which is the founder of my publishing company. And last time we had David on, I told people, I'm going to tell you guys the same, if you come on and join us, pitch him, not on the spot, but reach out afterwards and try to get a publishing deal with Morgan James. They're a New York publisher, $20 million company, very large. David's going to be coming on, so you can find out how to pitch him your book. And we have Randy Pizer, who's amazing. If you guys have seen her on our Blue Talk stuff, she helps you get book deals. She helps you get big name book deals. She helps you get movie rights deals for your stories. So she's going to be on. We're going to be doing coaching. You'll get 15-minute laser coaching from people, again, free. We're doing breakouts. What's hot or not to basically decide if your title's hot. You can get real-time feedback. We're going to be doing podcast pitching, expert panels, inspirational panels. I'm going to be teaching things like my dip method, my spider method. I'm going to actually share my book launch plan that took me 20 years to create. I'm finally creating it for the new book I'm putting out, and I'm going to share the entire book plan. So all that stuff completely free. You can come and go as you want and wish and need it. And the link, I'm just going to put right now, if you haven't already signed up, here's the link. It's funny because it gave the redirect link, but the actual link, you can also go to theexpertsbootcamp.com. So you can click the link there or go to theexpertsbootcamp.com. And if you go there, just go down and click claim my spot. It'll let you in for free and you'll be added to it so that we know to send you the link a week before the event. So that's coming up. I'm super excited. Those have been our other events. I've said they've been game changing. You can see some of the comments, actually, if you go to that website, you can see some of the comments at the top from other people.